It's back, the Reckless Renewables Rally. Make a statement where it truly counts, this time in Canberra. Join us on the Parliament House lawn at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, February 6th, the first session of Parliament for 2024. People from across the country, coastal and regional areas are rallying for the government to stop the reckless rollout of environmentally harmful, unreliable and costly so-called renewable projects. These include wind, solar and high voltage transmission line projects. Listen to speakers representing the federal and state governments, community organisations and environmentalists, all accompanied by great music and entertainment. Bring your flags, banners, signs and most importantly, your voice and ears to support rural and regional Australia. Together, let's ensure that the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, and the Australian government take responsibility and stop the risks and costs associated with their reckless and obsessive rush to adopt these so-called renewable energy projects. What's on the line is Australia's national interests, our economy, our security and the well-being of our environment both now and into the future. Join us in Canberra. Together we can make a difference. Not clean, not green, not net zero.
No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming.
We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
They put all these words on these flyers and it means nothing. It's garbage.
We're all going to die!
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
If you keep silent, then this is what's going to happen. And they'll make us silent.
I would rather paper cut my eyelids than have anything to do with those words.
I love that saying.
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the XCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp, joined by Adam Zahra. Now, Adam, last week we had a big episode with Shane Caulfield, former UN peacekeeper, and we got a lot of comments on the chats and the various sites that we're on, all saying, "Good on you, Shane. That was an excellent interview." So people seem to really enjoy it. How did you find it, mate?
It scared me because I thought that the UN the UN peacekeepers are there for the good of the world, and I've realised that actually they're not. They're just paid militants to go in and achieve a target, and whoever's paying the highest bill gets their services, and it's kind of like internationally backed. So I guess it was a bit eye-opening, but Shane was a really good guy and had really good things to talk about. So it was really awesome to actually chat with him, and it'll be good to get him back on.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I said Caulfield. It's Caldwell. Sorry, Shane, for saying the wrong name. But we'll definitely have him back on. He's got a lot of stories to tell. And it would be terrifying to have UN peacekeepers come into your country and you don't know who to trust and which ones are the good ones and which ones are not the not so good ones. But hopefully Australia is never faced with that. What we're faced with coming up on February 6th is the Reckless Renewables Rally. Now, I played the promo at the beginning there. Now, this is for all the farmers and people in the country and people in Port Stephens and down in the Illawarra that are facing offshore wind farms and wind projects and solar panel projects and batteries and the transmission lines crisscrossing the country to get to these projects is tearing up a lot of farmland, a lot of land, a lot of environmentally sensitive land. So people are getting down to Canberra on February 6th to protest in front of Parliament House. If you can get there, it is a Tuesday. It starts at 10 o'clock. If you can get off work or if you happen to be free or whatever, if you can get down there, it would be, we need a big turnout. So whatever you can do, I think it's very important. Adam, you're going down, are you?
I'm going down as well. I'm going down, and I implore everybody, take the damn day off work and head down there and show your face, because all this policy is doing is driving up electricity prices for everyone. So lose a day's worth of work, go down and protest, lose whatever, a couple of $100, right? $500, whatever, lose that, right, to try and save in the long run, because we need to change these guys' mind on this stupid ideas and stupid things that they're doing. We know, and I was going to talk to our special guest Burchell. We'll get to him in 1 second, but about this because he's an economist. But what happens is it's driving up prices, okay, and it drives up the from my understanding of it, it drives up inflation, and it just makes everything more expensive. Not to mention driving the deficit, okay, it takes away our security of energy, and the people of, I guess, when policies made by policymakers, they promise one thing, and then and really the people feel and see another thing. So there's a really big disconnect between, I think, policymakers and the people. This green energy, this fake renewable energy, as we call it, is a great thing. It's going to mean that, you can, as Albanese said, you have the solar panels on the roof, you plug your car in at night and you charge your battery, okay, and it costs you nothing. Well, that's all a lie. So, and I think the people see that. So that's really important. And I think we need to really stand up, and we need some conservative activism, and this is the way to do it.
And we've got Jeffrey Robertson in the chat. He says, take your tractor with you. Yes, if you can take your tractor down there like they do in Germany. And I was in Berlin some years ago where they were doing a protest, and there was just tractors as far every direction that you could see, tractors, and it was incredible. So if we can do something similar in Canberra, that would be a big statement. But if you want to support us and what we're doing here on the XCandidates, you can head over to Buy Me a Coffee. Just chuck in a few dollars if you choose. Jump on to Buy Me a Coffee, and that supports what we're doing here. Helps pay for the subscription and everything like that. So that would be great if you could jump there. But on tonight's episode, we have Burchell Wilson. Now, Burchell is the former Chief Economist at the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He holds degrees in both economics and law, including a Master's in Economics from Johns Hopkins University. At last year's New South Wales state election, he ran for the Libertarian Party in the seat of Bathurst, and he has been described as one of the most impactful public policy economic. I can't speak tonight. Sorry, economists of his generation. Burchell, how are you going tonight?
Hanging in there, but look, energy policy is something I had quite a bit to do with when I was at the Chamber. So I'll definitely be at the rally on the 6th of February, and we got some people coming down from Oberon as well. There's plans to roll 400 odd wind turbines out across Oberon in the state forest there, and the locals don't like it one bit.
They're about 250 meters tall out there, isn't it? If
275. They're almost as big as the Centrepoint Tower. It's going to be horrendous up on the ridge lines, and they'll be visible for kilometers around. So it's a real issue for the local community. It's bad public policy. These things, if the subsidies didn't exist, they wouldn't be commercially viable. So the key issue there, of course, is the subsidy worth whatever public benefit they're trying to get out of it? And the argument from the left is the benefit they're trying to get out of the wind turbines, the abated carbon emissions, but the value of the carbon abated is orders of magnitude lower than the subsidy provided. So it makes no sense even on their own terms from an economic perspective.
You tackled this back when you were at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You led a business coalition that successfully prosecuted the case to rationalize the renewable energy target. Now, that erased $12.5 billion from the nation's energy bill over 16 years. Now, is that kind of wastage rife in government? Is it? And next question, is it incompetence or pure corruption?
I think in the energy sector, the renewable sector is probably the worst. I mean, renewables is corporate welfare on steroids. The other industry that was the perennial mendicant going to government for handouts was the car industry. And the argument there was, it's an infant industry argument, but it ended up being a permanent infant that never reached global scale, never matured, and ultimately left our shores. So This is just orders of magnitude worse than the car industry, and most public policy economists realize this. For instance, from 2014 to 2030, it turns out there were $38 billion in subsidies going to be paid under just the renewable energy target to these wind and solar operators. So it's a huge pipeline of corporate welfare. Made no sense, in as much as the alleged benefit in terms of carbon abatement was orders of magnitude worse than the price of that carbon globally.
Wow. So basically, like in lay terms, right? So there's no benefit to these stupid wind turbines at all, like not financially, not carbon wise, not environmentally wise or anything.
Well, not on net, no. But to your earlier question, I mean, what drives this? Fundamentally, what drives this is the concern about climate change, which is more a political campaign at this point than a scientific one, alongside corporate welfare on a massive scale. So it's a worse combination of green left progressive politics and investment bankers and global mutual funds who want to invest in this stuff and be paid a large subsidy to do it.
We've got a comment in the chat from Sasha. She's asking if these subsidies are about destroying the economy.
Well, look, when I was at the chamber, as you pointed out, I headed up a campaign to rationalise the renewable energy target. We had the Business Council of Australia, the Minerals Council of Australia locked in behind the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We went to Deloitte Access Economics at the time, asked them to look at this for us, have a look at the electricity impacts, have a look at the broader impact on the economy. And that was quite striking. So no one had done this analysis before and fed those electricity price shocks through a large macro model. And what it told us is it was bad for wages, bad for employment, and ultimately it would need to lead to a net economic loss across the economy of about $28 billion. Now, the thing about that is the industry didn't like this very much. So instead of dealing with the arguments, they decided to come after me on a personal level. And the sort of range of different attacks over a period of about 6 months. They came at me through the membership. They came at me through some pet journalists that wrote hit pieces. And ultimately what they did is they paid someone to dox me. So the Clean Energy Council, as part of its advocacy program, it goes around doxing people it disagrees with. And look, I could see the reason they did it. There was $38 billion in subsidies I was shining a light on and pointing out, look, this makes no economic sense, even on your own terms. I mean, the value of the carbon abated using these mechanisms is far less than the subsidy you're receiving from ultimately the energy user.
I live in Stephen. I'm just going to quickly, sorry, Adam. I live in a teal electorate in Warringah, and I look at the voters that are supporting the teals, and we've discussed it on this show before. They have like a cultish attitude about them. But what you described is the level above that is almost like a mafia, whereas they might not kill you, but they'll come after you professionally and try and silence you and destroy you that way.
Oh yeah, this industry is extremely malevolent. I couldn't make up what happened to me. It's just so sinister. So I wake up on the morning that the Warburton Review is due to be released. This was the review that the Abbott government commissioned of the renewable energy target. We had some eminent economists on the panel. Dick Warburton headed it up. So what I found on the morning that the Warburton Review came out was someone anonymously or using a pseudonym had somehow managed to find their way into my Facebook account, ransack about 12 to 18 months worth of posts, try and find anything they could use to either discredit me or get me fired. And they've sent that to 6 members of the Canberra Press Gallery, copied in the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And all of a sudden I'm front page news for 48 hours over essentially trivia, tongue-in-cheek remarks amongst friends they used to light me up in the press, try and get me fired because they wanted to protect their $38 billion in subsidies. I mean, it's just sickening behavior, and you have large corporates. They fund the Clean Energy Council. These are some of the biggest names in Australia. I mean, Transgrid, Acciona, the Pacific Hydro. There's a whole list online. Go online, check the members of the Clean Energy Council. If you want to write their government relations people a letter, then feel free. I'll be following up that on a personal level at some point this year, and I'll probably mention it at the rally, to be honest, because I'm sick of living with it. So I haven't told the full story yet. This kind of first tentative airing of what happened, and it's just the most corrosive sort of behavior you could imagine from any sort of business organization.
It certainly doesn't seem that they're really working for the best interests of Australia and the Australian people.
No, quite the opposite. I mean, it's these are rent seekers who will say anything to ensure that public policy is geared towards delivering them tens of billions of dollars in subsidies. And whether or not it makes any sense or not, they don't seem to care, because it's the lifeblood of their industry. They cannot survive without these subsidies.
And just so we're clear, right? Subsidies are taxpayer dollars. Our money that we earn, that we pay into like as taxes to the government, right? Those subsidies are that money. That's why our taxes are partially so high.
In this case, the subsidies it's crafted in a different manner. So the way it works is there's a mandate for a certain percentage of renewable energy. In order to meet that mandate, the renewable energy generators are paid renewable energy credits, which are the subsidy in this case. And because it takes place off balance sheet, it's paid for ultimately by the consumer. So the price of those renewable energy credits gets added to your electricity bill. So that's who's paying the subsidy. It's a neat workaround because it's invisible. It's not on budget, so you can't point out a budget line item, but it's definitely there in your electricity bill, and it's pushing them higher. And also the Productivity Commission hasn't been particularly good at picking this up either, because usually the Productivity Commission's pretty handy at fingering corporate welfare. Every 12 months they put out a trade and systems review, but they've kind of never really picked up on the huge subsidies under the red. I mean, they don't have a specific line item because it's difficult to quantify, because you have to forecast the price of these renewable energy credits. I mean, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. I just wonder why they haven't done a better job of doing it.
So then it's basically a tax on your net income.
Oh yeah, it has the same effect as a tax. It drives your electricity bill higher and delivers tens of billions of dollars to these large renewable energy companies.
Okay, people. So what Burchell's basically saying is that basically you earn whatever $100,000, you pay your 37 cents in a dollar tax, and then that little bit the 63% that you get left with is then when in your electricity bill, some of that you pay your electricity bill is another tax. So it's a tax on your net income, just like other things when you paying your excise taxes on your fuel and on your cigarettes and on your alcohol. That's another tax that we don't see, just like toll roads and all those kind of things. So
yeah, effectively, it's a hidden tax. You're exactly right, and this is what I said once the carbon tax was repealed back in 2014, that the next biggest cab off the rank was the renewable energy target, which was effectively just a hidden carbon tax. And from an economic perspective, whether it's a tax or not doesn't really make too much difference if it's having the same impact on end energy users. I mean, it's an artifice, and even the legislation implementing the carbon tax went out of its way never to use the word carbon tax, because the ALP was so paranoid about the carbon tax campaign. And frankly, it was. They just had whoever drafted the legislation decide to engage in that exercise in spin, which was horrendous.
When I spoke to you off air, I said to you, oh, this is where Adam and I are really excited about this because we haven't had an economist on the show before to talk about these issues. And you said, well, there's not many in Australia. Do you think that's part of the problem? We're all thinking that there's all these clever people out there that are analysing these things, and that surely someone can see it. Surely someone will come out and put their hand up, and obviously they'll get attacked for it like yourself. But if enough people do it, there will be too much pressure for the government to push through with it. But is it just the case that there is not enough people out there that have the training and the knowledge to really pick these things apart?
Yeah, precisely. And I think the Reserve Bank put out a paper maybe 5-6 years ago outlining just how many economists there were in the country, and it's only about 4,000. And of those, vast majority of those either work for government or in academia. So if you work for government, what are the chances that you're going to be allowed to have an opinion on policy matters? It's probably close to zero. And even if you tried to have an opinion on policy matters as a government employed economist, it's going to be career limiting if you express them. So most economists, they're bought and paid for, they're forced to keep their head down. And the sort of economists, sort of people who have the scope to be vocal about public policy, just very few and far between. So maybe they work at a think tank, or maybe they work for a trade association or an organization like the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But you could, or maybe they're commentators at the Australian. I mean, Judith Sloan's national living treasure, as far as I'm concerned, because she's got deep expertise, she writes well, and she's incredibly brave. And I suppose I was incredibly brave in Canberra, but at the same time, potentially incredibly naive, because I suppose I kind of had no conception that anything like this was at all possible. And but frankly, I didn't care because it's the right thing to do.
Well, that's what happens when big money is involved, and we think that we live in a good country and we have a good system of government, but these are billions and billions of dollars that these people stand to gain at the end of the day. So they'll do anything that they have to do to get their agenda through.
And that seems to be the attitude of the Clean Energy Council, that they got a good outcome for the industry, and they got away with it. I mean, it hasn't cost them anything, and partly because the press did their bidding for them and weren't particularly concerned when I pointed out what they'd done exactly. Because at the time I had no idea who'd done this, but then 2 weeks later, an IT guy I knew had dug around in the metadata and actually identified the individual. And once I knew it made a lot more sense. So it was then that and sort of realized, well, that figures, that's why this individual's done this, and that individual's at the Clean Energy Council.
Yeah, but then it becomes incredibly difficult for you, because if you put your head up and say, well, this person did it, you're facing defamation cases and lawfare and all these things that take decades and years to go through.
They suck the soul out of your life, mate. They suck the soul out of your life.
And money out of your bank account as well. This is how they do it. This is they target good people who might not have the capability to go up against these huge well-funded groups.
Yeah, well, at the time I went to the Australian and one of the journalists there. I said, look, here's what happened here. And they wrote it up. And look, I called the Australian Federal Police to get them involved, because there's potential range of potential breaches of criminal law involved. And the story ran. It got published. Nothing really came of it. The police kind of couldn't be bothered. Said it was a civil matter. And you're right. If you take on powerful people in this country, they will sue for defamation just to shut you up and dump legal costs on top of you. It's just that's how they operate. It's a game to them, and they think they're above the law for the most part, probably because they've got enough money to be above the law.
I mean, we got a few topics, like how bad is the disinformation bill going to happen? Going to be when it gets passed on issues like this? That's one point. But just before we go to that point, what was when you did the case to rationalise the renewable energy target. Did you do a comparison between renewable energy methods and nuclear energy? Like, did you give them any sort of comparos into like the cost-benefit analysis and all that kind of stuff?
No, look, the debate about nuclear in this country is kind of, and this circles back to Stephen's point that are there really intelligent people having these conversations in this country? No, absolutely not.
That's so scary.
It is. It's terrifying. I mean, academics, they stick to their knitting. They don't want to get involved in the cut and thrust of Australian public policy because energy policy is just a killing zone. It's the left will destroy a career over this stuff.
Well, it's just simple. It's simple numbers. If it's right, there's 4,000 economists in Australia, and we take COVID as an example, where 95% of the population went along with the government mandate, and 5% resisted, and they resisted quite. They went up against to resist that. What's 5% of that 4,000? It's not a lot of people. It's not a lot of people at all. And
look, and there's just no organisation. There's no funding of public interest litigation on the right. People's employment. There's no scope legally, apparently, to push back on vaccine mandates. So most people just got steamrolled economically, and they couldn't even organise politically to lobby for their own rights. It's just incredibly frustrating. I think the thing is, Australia doesn't have a very deep civic culture. So in terms of the right in Australia, we've got the Institute of Public Affairs and the Centre for Independent Studies, and then you've got the two major parties. So beyond that, there's sort of not the rich ecosystem of grassroots organisations, public interest litigators that you might find in the States, for instance.
I think they're forming. I think people are starting to come together and they're learning. I mean, we're still in the infancy of it all, but I think there are good people coming together in the background and they're saying something's not right, and the true interests of the people are not being represented. The people in government are not representing the people, and they're not representing the interests of the people. They're more representing the interests either of their party or of lobbyists. So sometimes these things do take time to formulate and gather together. But in the meantime, there's a lot of money and a lot of wastage that's going on. And unfortunately, it's our children that are going to have to pay for it all.
Yeah, I look at this because as an economist, I'm forced to engage in sort of an analysis of the political economy landscape in which an economist operates. And from that, I mean, well, why are things as bad as they are? Why didn't I have access to a large pot of money to either defend myself when I was doxxed or run the advocacy when I ran it? Actually, the amount of money the chamber chipped into that piece of research was precisely zero. And simply because I was able to pick up some grant money. So, and the realization is that we don't have a political elite that cares very much about us at all. So most of the money in politics is actually, it's just the public electoral funding. So I think it's $2 out of $3 comes from the taxpayer. There's a bit of corporate money, not a lot. There's truckloads of trade union money. And the whole system runs on inertia. So you have these two major parties, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. And what matters to them is their brand. And most of the people who get into Parliament just ride that brand into office. And the whole thing, as far as I can tell, policy is basically dictated to us by the media. And they're probably the last people you want formulating or dictating policy. So who are the media? They're barely employable liberal arts graduates who've got no subject matter expertise. They're not really accountable either. And they can pretty much say or do whatever they want.
And I was reading one of the articles that you wrote, and Jim Chalmers, the current Treasurer of Australia, is not an economist.
He's got a PhD, but it's in political economy. was actually looking at it the other. Sorry, it's in politics. So he spent, I think it was like 3 or 4 years at ANU writing this extended thesis on Paul Keating and his time in politics. And I was reading it just a couple of days back. I was thinking, well, this guy's not interested in policy at all. He's interested in politics and power. And he hasn't bothered to educate himself about how to formulate policy or constitutional matters or educate himself, give himself a law degree. It's just this is someone who just wants to be in politics for the sake of being important. I mean, it's almost a vanity play. And I think about Paul Keating, it was look, he got a whole bunch of things wrong. He put the economy into recession because he wanted to target the current account balance, which if you're talking to any economist these days, will just make them despair as to how backwards it is. And why did we have the Hawke-Keating reform era? Well, that was largely because the Liberal Party and the Nationals were urging them to go further. So it's easy to reform things when you've got the opposition party of the day telling you that you haven't gone far enough. So I think they used to call John Hewson Captain Zero because he wanted to go zero tariffs. So reform is easy when you've got no obstacles. And there's this whole mythic narrative around the Hawke-Keating reforms, a lot of which were just inevitable.
This is one of the things I was talking to you before as well. And I said, oh, well, we had all these reforms under Keating and Hawke and then Howard and Costello, but we haven't really had reform since. And you corrected me and you said, well, that's not correct. We've had reform. It just hasn't been the right reform. Do you want to maybe expand on that?
We've had changes, but they've been bad changes. Reform is generally something that improves productivity or welfare. So I think my issue is, has there been any major reforms since the GST? And no, probably not. But what we have had since the GST is a whole bunch of policy missteps, and carbon tax being one. More recently, the Labor government has just turned our industrial relations system on its head. There's been no real changes in the tax system. But there have been a whole bunch of very poor infrastructure projects. And what else? It's just difficult so many policy missteps, it's just difficult to mention them all. So it's been death by 1,000 cuts, and that's what's undermining productivity. I mean, you can't point to one particular thing, but if you can point to about 50 to 60 different policy measures that all point in the wrong direction, then collectively they add up to a lot.
So it must frustrate you, and you must want to just pull your hair out, going, if you were the treasurer or had some sort of sway over the government, is there any types of reform or changes that you would like to make to make the economy stronger, or put more dollars in people's pockets, or fix the tax system, or what's something that you would love to really sink your teeth into and change here in Australia?
Well, coming back to sort of meta issue of the political economy landscape, I think what I'd really like to see are better institutions. So Milton Friedman's view was the point of economic institutions, or institutions generally, is to make it easy for bad people to make good decisions. But unfortunately, what we have at the moment is a set of institutions that enable bad people to make very bad decisions. So I'll give an example of the set of institutional frameworks we have at the moment that have led to quite good outcomes on a macroeconomic level. So what we've done globally is we've outsourced monetary policy to independent central banks. And what that does essentially is say, look, we're taking this away from the politicians. They can't be trusted. You leave politicians alone with monetary policy, and all of a sudden you end up like Argentina with 140% inflation in certain circumstances. So globally, there's a consensus that politicians just couldn't be trusted with this. So it got outsourced to independent banks, central banks. These central banks were given institutional independence, and those arrangements were sort of, I think initially they were informal, then they became formalized in legislation and convention. And what do we get as a result? Inflation has been tamed globally. At least, I mean, we've had a recent outburst in terms of the increase in inflation post the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but that historically has been quite modest relative to the sort of double-digit inflation rates we had in the 1980s when monetary policy was still in the hands of institutions that weren't necessarily independent. So you have to have a set of institutional arrangements that make it easy for bad people to make good decisions, and hopefully make it hard for bad people to make bad decisions. And we just don't have that at the moment.
Okay. Because
on specifics, I think at the current point in time, I'd just be happy if they stopped turning policy on its head and changing things markedly. Because look at business investment at the moment as a proportion of GDP. It's at 1990s recession lows, and that's why productivity growth is so poor. So productivity growth is poor because businesses don't have the confidence to invest, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And interest rates have just gone up, so it's harder to meet the hurdle rate for projects. And on top of that, you've got all sorts of potential policy uncertainty from the federal and state governments.
So, sorry, I was going to say, so what, like I've got, so what does it take then, and I don't know if I'm repeating the question, but what does it take then to turn it around? What does Australia or Australian Treasury need to do, okay, to turn it around? Like, how do we get back to surplus? Because I think surplus is, from my understanding when I heard the last budget, was that surplus means that if you can pay the interest off the debt that the country has and have money left over, you're in surplus. You're not actually paying any principal back.
Well, I'm probably less concerned about the budget at this point, but you're exactly right. The Liberals managed to trash that while they were last in office. But turn it around generally, people always quite pessimistic. They say, look, well, it's going to take a long, hard recession before anything changes in terms of public policy formulation. But we had that. It was actually self-imposed in conjunction with the pandemic. So the policy response to the pandemic was to cause a severe recession. Did public policy formulation improve afterwards or during that period? No, absolutely not. It's just things got worse and worse. So I think what you really need is better leadership, and there's no sign of that manifesting itself because there's no money, there's no incentives to do it. So show me the incentive and I'll show you the result. And if the only incentive is to, if the reward for being brave in Canberra is to have your career destroyed by the press, why would you bother? So no one's going near it. Career in politics, it's career suicide. Why bother? People don't, and they just get frustrated, angry, bitter, and none of those energies are channeled particularly productively at the moment.
You hit the nail on the head. We're definitely lacking leadership here in this country. So, and I think you're right. I mean, people just don't want to put their hand up. I spoke to my accountant the other day. He's my age or a little bit older, and I said, "How do we get people my age and your age engaged?" And he's like, "Well, they're so busy. They got families, and they just don't want to put their head above the parapet because they can." One little bad post on social media or something, and they could lose their employment. So it's a rough old world out there, but we definitely need people with some leadership and conviction, and with some true vision for this country to stand up and take it in the right direction.
Well, that's precisely the issue. There's the politics of personal destruction in the political arena. Mean that you'd have to have rocks in your head if you've got a house and a mortgage and kids. Why would you risk any of that for the sake of doing anything in the public policy arena, because no one's going to thank you, and you're going to have a whole bunch of people come after you trying to destroy you on a personal level. Key amongst those will be the journalists, left-wing activists, Antifa, and they think it's funny. They get off on this stuff. If they can get someone fired, they really enjoy it. I've sort of been going back and forth with a range of people on Twitter over the last 3 months, and they think it's hilarious trying to figure out where you work, trying to get you fired, and that's just normal for them. And because
it's sick,
but that's where we are. We're in a cold civil war, and a lot of this is just delayed catching up with where they are in the States. If you go over to the States, it's just orders of magnitude worse again. People informing on their colleagues because they had the wrong app on their phone at an advertising agency. So doing anything they can to dox, harass, destroy the reputation of the individual, the business, destroy their careers. And one of the key and the reason they're despised is journalists thrive on this stuff. For cheap clickbait articles, they're just completely unaccountable. Where unless you can sue them for defamation, which is quite difficult, expensive, and unfortunately, if what they say is true, even if it's trivial, if what they say is true, then you've got no legal recourse under defamation law. So, and they just blow you up for anything these days. And look, if they can knock out Christian Porter on an allegation as sketchy as that one from a woman who's now deceased, then what hope do ordinary people have? So I understand why people looking at Australian public policy and, more importantly, our political lives just think, well, what hope is there? And I suppose because I've been through this once already, and I've been cancelled once, so I figure you can't get cancelled twice, so I just don't care anymore. It's one reason I ran last year. It's good to play a part in helping John Ruddock get elected to the upper house. But at some point, you have to realize you don't have a choice. So I may be cancelled 100%, but this accountant friend of yours maybe is only cancelled sort of 60% because he's never going to reach managerial position, or certain opportunities will be denied to him because of his race or gender. And so sort of certain people are cancelled to a certain degree already. So it'll get to a point where people will realize, well, I've got more to gain than I have to lose. And the other thing that the left are doing by cancelling people is that they only go after the high performers. So I was an early casualty. The thing is, once you build up an army of people who are high conviction, high capacity, and have nothing to lose, do you think we care very much?
Yeah.
No.
Do you think we're going to stay silent? Do you think what else can they do to you? I mean, so I'm quite happy to go for the throat of these people, point out what they're doing, how they're doing it, bring it to the attention of the people who are funding their advocacy and campaigns of harassment. And I'm not alone anymore. Initially, I was alone. People said 6 months will blow over. But more than 9 years later, and the left is still crying about how they got me and what they got me for, and they think it's funny. Well, they're not so funny when you throw it back at them. And these are just terrible people. What drives them, I think, fundamentally, they are deeply insecure. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people on the left, they just they want more equality because they're losers.
It's like going through a bad breakup. The first heartache's always the worst, but then you pick yourself up, you move on, and you move, and then it's not so hard again. It's similar. If they come after you and attack your career, and you pick yourself up and move forward, you develop that extra layer of skin almost, where you're maybe not bulletproof, but you know how to handle it. You know that nothing's inevitable. You can move on, and you can find ways of moving forward and getting past it. So it makes you even more, I guess, dangerous going forward, because now you've been knocked down and you've picked yourself up, and here you are ready to go again.
Oh, but not just that. This whole journey it took me first across to London, and then it took me across to the DC in the United States. And while I was there, I picked up a whole bunch of new skills in the political arena, in the campaign space. And I come back to Australia and just realised that things are quite quaint by comparison. So we don't have a professionalised political class in the same way they do in the States. So in terms of campaign strategy and tactics, they're about 10 years ahead of where we are. In terms of data and analytics, we're probably about 20 years behind best practice. And I did campaign school, candidate school, comprehensive fundraising training in the States, and it was incredibly empowering.
And you're bringing that here, right? In coming up, you've got events booked for...
Yeah, we've got local council races later in the year. Good thing about local councils, they're not particularly, it's low cost, low risk. And I thought I'd put together a program for people. And I've got some Americans that are going to teach this program. It's 2 days intensive boot camp on soup to nuts of how to run for local council. Some of the digital stuff is incredibly powerful. We teach people how to fundraise, the responsibilities of office. There's a session on defamation law, electoral law. And what you realize after you've done all that is just how empowering it is, because the political class is 0.1% of the population. And if your political class don't know what they're doing, then the entire country, the entire movement is just leaderless. So conservatives don't train their candidates. So I'm just running this program as a pilot. People can come along. It's 2 days, $250, and do 2 days worth of instruction with some of the world's leading political campaigns. These guys have raised $400 million in the last 4 years. They've won 300 odd legislative campaigns in the States and built email lists bigger than this entire country. So it's an incredibly empowering thing to do. If you don't have the skill set, you're kind of defenseless. And once you kind of stuck in that mindset that your accountant friend has is, well, they don't know what they can do. They don't know how things can ever be any different. And they're also incredibly risk averse when it comes to politics, because if there's a sort of crisis communications event, they don't know how to handle it. If there's a threat of a lawsuit, how do they handle it? If they get caught up with a defamation action or Human Rights Commission investigation, well, this program gives you the skill set to make sure that you don't get chewed up legally. You protect yourself, but also gives you the skill set to win. And the other thing about local council is run for local council. Who really cares? It's roads, rates, and rubbish in large part. So it's not particularly vicious. I was a bit active around the Lithgow City Council campaign back in 2021, and it's all very civil. It's all very constructive. It's really more at the state and the federal level that politics gets really nasty, because it's impersonal and there's a lot more press involvement. So once you're on council, you could sort of leverage that up to a run at state, or if you're the mayor of a large regional centre, you could potentially have a tilt at federal politics and simply on the basis of the name recognition. You need that time in the community, and time on council gives you that. So
we get minor party like people watching us. You know what I mean? I'm sure we've had a few higher ups in the minor party people watching us on the Libertarian side, probably One Nation side, and probably a little bit of UAP side as well. Do you recommend that anyone that's going to try and contend for the council elections coming up this year, that they should actually attend this course, or should the conservative minor parties be sending people or their primary candidates to these courses to learn how to campaign properly?
Or are they going to keep blood from a stone, Adam?
Sorry?
I said, good luck getting blood from a stone.
Hey, blood from a stone, but if they want people to run.
Yeah. Look, all of the above. I mean, if people want to win, they have to learn how to win. And unfortunately, there's just a lot of magical thinking in the campaign space. So we like to be a bit more scientific. Once people are trained, then they know how to fundraise, they know how to formulate a budget, they know how to meet a vote objective to get onto council. And some people I'd recommend come along, not just people who are going to run, but also people who are going to function as high-level campaign volunteers. Because the first thing that happens once you're a candidate is you lose about 30 IQ points and just become like a hamster on a hamster wheel, just trying to get everything done. You need someone there to help carry the load and keep you focused on what's important. So the boot camps are perfect for that purpose, either whether you're a candidate, campaign manager, or even if you just want to be active in the sort of not-for-profit space, building a grassroots movement, running a small think tank, or maybe you have certain issues campaigns you want to run, freedom of speech, right to life, whatever. It's that the boot camp caters for that skill set. Plus, it also scales to state and federal. So it's in a way, it's kind of wildly overpowered for council, because a lot of these councils out west, they almost have as many candidates they have spots on council. So it's just a question of putting your hand up.
Yeah.
But if you're running for what?
Some people believe there's going to be a federal election in November, so maybe we all need to get ready and get to these boot camps. I'll put the link in the chat. In the show notes. There's 3 events. There's 2 in Sydney and 1 in Oberon. So if people can, give up their weekend to go to these events, I mean, I'm sure their money will be well spent. I've also put the link in the chat if you want to call in and speak to Burchell. We haven't had too many callers lately, so please call in and ask Burchell a question. But one question that I've asked on this show in the last few episodes is, how come a family in the 1970s, 1980s, or 1990s could buy a home on a single income? Maybe the wife is at home looking after the children, raising the children, but we can't do that anymore. Like, and now it's even hard with 2 incomes to try and purchase a property here in Sydney, at least. And elsewhere in the country as well. What happened? Apparently, haven't had a recession in 30 years. We've had an economic boom. We've got the mining industry going bonanzas. But for some reason, our house properties are way out of reach. And you might be able to answer this question, because you're an economist, but also looking at this graph that you posted here on Twitter. Are you able to answer that question and maybe explain this graph?
Well, I find a lot of the conversation about house prices very disingenuous, because the problem is all these bank economists and people who work in the corporate sector, they can't mention the obvious, and that is house prices are driven by demographics, and immigration policy does matter. So we've actually been through a period now in terms of the COVID lockdown. We sort of had a natural experiment whereby immigration was cut off overnight, and then it ramped up sharply again. And what we saw around that period was rents came off markedly, but at the same time, you also had house prices were relatively stable and probably increased a bit, but that was more a function of interest rates than it was the immigration issue. So I'm an economist. I went away, looked at the economic literature, and did some estimates. And the long run elasticity of house prices with respect to population growth is about 2. So what does that mean? It means if there's a 1% increase in population, it means there'll be a 2% increase in house prices. So I thought, well, that's interesting. What does that mean in practical terms? And what sort of role has immigration played in the current housing affordability crisis? So I went back 25 years and did a thought experiment. What if net overseas immigration had been set to 0? So I looked at the resulting population, and then I translated that through to house prices using that estimated elasticity. And it kind of turns out that the impact of immigration over that 25-year period has been huge. So if you'd had net overseas migration set at 0, according to economic modelling, and that estimate's consistent with the estimate they use in the Treasury model in TRIM. Turns out that if you'd set net overseas migration at 0 25 years ago, house prices would be 40% lower. So
40%?
Yeah, it's huge. And no one will mention this because they're just, I suppose the thing is, if you work for government, you can't. If you work for a large bank, then any sort of discussion about immigration at all is just almost forbidden because your view is you'll destroy a career. So you look to the economists at the think tanks to be more objective, and they're just not. I mean, Peter Tulip at the Centre for Independent Studies is just completely obscurantist. He mentions the supply side ad infinitum, but trying to pin him down on the impact of immigration, and he won't mention it, despite having written one of the seminal papers in the country on house prices and house price models. And so that's how bought and paid for most economists are, and it's the reason why I'm sort of glad I've moved away from the industry or the profession, because I can be more outspoken as an economist, not actually working as an economist, and probably more impactful as well. It's ironic, but that's just a function of sort of the political ecosystem in which most economists find themselves, and the absolute intolerance of any sort of reasonable conversation around immigration policy. And it's I would have thought the relationship would be fairly obvious, and it should be fairly uncontroversial to discuss it, because there is an economic literature out there, and I did consult that economic literature in terms of coming up with those estimates. But trying to get any sort of traction with the national media, they just they don't care.
So we could. I'm sorry, because I'm hung up on this house price thing, because house price, right? It's $1 million house. If it was set at net zero immigration, that $1 million house would only be worth around about $600,000, roughly. Okay, and then if you got rid of all the green tape and all the levies on that, we know that that's at $110,000 per house anyway. So you're talking about the average house in my area where I live, out in Southwest Sydney, is around about $1 million. You can't buy anything for really under $1 million these days. I'd be looking at something that really was $1 million, should be really around about 400 to 500,000.
Yeah, this was all a result of deliberate policy decisions, and ultimately the political class who made those decisions, they just didn't care, or if they did care, they weren't informed, because a lot of I don't know, I'd say 80% of our parliamentarians are just making up the numbers. The number of politicians actually understand. How many economists are there in Parliament? Mostly they're lawyers.
Not Jim Chalmers.
No, not Jim Chalmers. It must be frustrating being Jim Chalmers, and you've got a Harvard PhD in your junior ministry and an Oxford PhD on the. I think Charlton's got a portfolio at this point, so it's kind of embarrassing that he's sitting there as a result of whatever factional arrangement put him in the Treasury role, and he's just wildly underperforming. The guy. He's not credible when he speaks on economics. He's got no credentials for the role, and seemingly has no appetite to do anything difficult in it.
So I think housing prices are really important to like our audience. Our audience has, our audience, there's probably people in our audience who are like, 40, 45, 50 that don't have houses. Or there are people who have houses and are worried about their children to get houses. Yeah. What other things are driving up price, like housing prices politically, other than say the immigration laws imposed and the green tape, i.e. the $110,000 for all your water treatments and insulations and stuff like that you got to put onto them now? Is there other factors?
Look, the constraint on the supply side is definitely huge. So Peter Tulip's not completely disingenuous in flagging it, and ultimately demand. There's two sides to the market. There's the demand side and the supply side. Now the thing is, there doesn't seem to be much ability to actually correct those supply side deficiencies, and largely that's a question of development applications being approved, rezoning land for residential development. So in light of the fact that it seems impossible to do anything on the supply side, well, my view is you do have a lever there that's fairly easy to pull and can have quite a large impact on house prices. So the debate people should be having if they're concerned about house prices is a question of population policy. And until we sort out the supply side, we can't really afford to have sort of 900,000 people added to the population over the last 2 years. It's just been horrendous. Anyone who's trying to rent in Sydney knows how bad it is. Anyone trying to buy in Sydney. I feel particularly sorry for young couples who are deferring having kids because they're trying to save a deposit for a house. And that's how bad it is. If you've got housing policy and immigration policy set at a level that destroys people's ability to start families, that's more a civilizational issue than an economic one.
And we're not mentioning stamp duty either. The amount of money that you have to fork out just for stamp duty, and then you're locked in because, say, you purchase a property, and a lot of the times you go into an inspection maybe once or twice, maybe 3 times, and you get 5 minutes to look at a property. Then you have to make the decision: am I going to buy this property? You don't know anything about the area. You don't know what it's like at night time. It could be, there could be plenty of parties going around the area, or you might not like your neighbors, or whatever issue might arise from a poorly made decision. And you go, well, I can't just sell it and move because I'm going to have to pay stamp duty again. So you're almost locked in a way because of the $50,000 you'd have to fork out again just to give it to the government.
Yeah, stamp duty is a wildly inefficient tax as well. So it's long overdue to be abolished, but state governments are addicted to it because it's about a third of their revenue. So until that revenue source is sorted out, you're not going to get any real progress on abolishing or reducing stamp duty. And you're right, it leads to these sort of marked inefficiencies in the labour market as well. People can't relocate interstate for new jobs because of this friction involved with having to pay stamp duty to relocate.
I'm going to ask you a hard question though, and feel free to correct me because I could be completely wrong about this, but I'm going to go back to immigration, and I'm trying to learn a little bit more about libertarianism and the Libertarian Party. And obviously you were a candidate for the Libertarian Party, but my understanding of libertarianism is that they almost believe in open borders because it's a free society and as little government as possible, and you shouldn't have restrictions placed upon you. Am I way off course with that?
No, you're exactly right. I think that's more a function of sort of libertarianism you find in the States at the likes of the Cato Institute. So I certainly have an issue with large-scale immigration or any sort of open borders policy, and whether or not I triumph ultimately in terms of convincing the party executive at the federal level, it's kind of a bad idea. Plus, it's a vote loser as well. So I think I describe myself as more paleo-libertarian. And the thing I like about the New South Wales executive is there's scope within the Libertarian Party to encompass that worldview. So economies, they're grounded in a political culture which ultimately comes out of a civilization. And unless they're considering those broader issues and talking about issues of, and we can get into this if you want to, institutional economics and the political cultures that support high quality institutions of government. And no one does in DC because it's too esoteric. It's too esoteric a topic. And a lot of these people who fund the Cato Institute, they're kind of highly ideological. And so if I have one critique of libertarianism, and it's one I've kind of had to overcome personally and intellectually myself, is it can't be ideological. It has to, libertarianism has to lead to good results. Otherwise, there's no point adhering to it. So I'm quite pragmatic and utilitarian in that sense, which makes sense given my background as an economist. I'm certainly not an ideologue, certainly not someone who's going to sign up to open borders and just blindly ignore any sort of downside costs involved in those sort of policies.
So essentially, the line has to be drawn somewhere, correct? Because if you go the full mile with libertarianism, I mean, people make this argument that what's the difference between libertarianism and anarchy, where there's no rules and laws at all? So could it just be purely we need to establish, okay, we are libertarian, that's the ideology, but there are certain things where we have to draw the line. Immigration might be one of them, and we can't just have an influx of immigration if it's going to be detrimental to our standard of living here.
Yeah, well, that's precisely my point. So certain cases in certain instances, there'll be a case for immigration that will be beneficial to the economy and the nation as a whole. But if you're at a point with the housing market that it's leading to families not being able to start having children, then I kind of look at that and think, well, that makes no sense to me at all. I will not subscribe to a position that's ideological if it leads to bad outcomes. It's just, I'm pragmatic in that sense. I'm also paleo-libertarian as opposed to libertarian, or someone who's more anarchist libertarian, or just someone who's more anarchist, who doesn't believe in anything. And it's a difficult part of the spectrum to inhabit, because you don't necessarily find a lot of fellow travelers.
Is that a problem within the Libertarian Party, that there's so many different levels of libertarianism? Because I've been to some of the branch meetings and things like that as well, and I know that a fairly competent candidate who's been around the area for a while, he says that he's more of a anarchist libertarian. Then you're saying, I haven't heard the term paleo libertarian before.
Well, I think if you spend enough time in the States, you pick up a whole different lexicon. But you're right. Libertarians are naturally highly ideological, but also very, very principled in terms of their policy positions. So it's why I find a lot of the more conservative members of the Liberal Party washing up in the Libertarian Party. That's why you find some of the more libertarian Liberal Party members getting fed up and moving across. And I think for me, it's the institutional economics argument that makes me strongly paleo-libertarian. So there's a realization that in the economics profession that a country has first-world living standards because it has high-quality institutions of government, and a poor country has third-world living standards because it has poor-quality institutions of government. So that's kind of the consensus within the economics profession. So the next question becomes, well, where do these institutions come from? And for me, as someone who thinks a bit more broadly than just economic models, it's sort of obvious as well. These institutions grow out of a political culture. And where does this political culture come from? It comes from certain parts of the world, and there's a whole interesting conversation there that I looked at the literature when I was at Johns Hopkins, and it is absolutely fascinating. Why do these city-states in Italy have these interesting business norms that date back 800 odd years? And why do certain parts of the world seemingly not able to form a stable government? So it's I posted about this on Twitter this morning. It was a conversation we had in Canberra over dinner, and it's very rich literature, and one that's in its infancy. And there's a great long essay by Garrett Jones from George Mason University that I've linked to in that Twitter thread as well. Definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. So we'll check it out on your page for sure. I got another quick question.
Looks like we may have a caller. I just want to see if
I think Jason's trying to listen.
Yeah, well, we'll bring him on. Jason, have you got a question for Burchell?
No, not really. I was just listening in, and I was just listening into about what's happening in this country at the moment. I believe it's just an outright communist takeover. I mean, you've got Dan Andrews going to China 14 times. I mean, why does he need to go to China to do business deals when he can just speak on government encrypted phones? Because government encrypted phones are recorded in triplicate and stuff like that. You can't talk about shonky stuff when you're talking on things that are recorded in triplicate. So that's what I believe. You've got all of this sabotaging our economy by knocking out power stations and basically the war on energy that they've got going at the moment has just personified Biden's war on energy, because Biden's war on energy, basically they've had a lot of applications approved for the mama and papa oil producers, but he's made so much red tape and so much expense that it's literally caused them to say forget about it, which means there's about 1 to 2 million less barrels a day coming out of the ground in America, which is what drove the price of oil up, which is what's funded Putin's war, because the Russians need oil to be over about $80 a barrel to be able to make good money out of it, right? So, I mean, and then you've got the Labor Party making it worse by their war on energy and stuff like that. I mean, we're really looking at, from 3 years ago, we're looking at about 40% inflation on a lot of items, not just 6% like they say. I don't know where they get this 6% from.
Well, it's 6% per year, and then it just adds 6 plus 6 plus 6 or whatever it might be. Is that correct, Burchell, when it comes to inflation? And do you believe? I mean, maybe the better question is, do you believe the inflation numbers?
Got no real reason to question the ABS and the numbers they put out, but you're right. I mean, these things compound over time. I think the US dollar's lost about 97% of its value over the last 100-odd years due to inflation. So it's just part of the way things function, and I don't know that it's going to change too much. And the recent inflation spurt we've had it's been responded to. Inflation's coming down, and I think longer term we'll get back to the target band. And I think the real concern is that the rise in inflation hasn't been matched by an increase in wages. Real wages have gone backwards.
But don't wage increases just drive inflation more? Like, if you increase the wages while we've got companies in China where companies can hire 5 to 10 workers for the cost of one Australian worker and stuff like that. If you raise wages in this country, it's going to drive inflation in this country, and then it's going to force more companies to run overseas, sort of thing, because they'd have to raise their prices to a point where they wouldn't be viable.
Yeah, that's definitely a real concern. That I think throughout this recent inflation uptick, the Reserve Bank was keeping its eye on wages to make sure that wages weren't rising to keep up with inflation, which in turn would lead to second round effects and sort of wage price inflation spiral that you learn about at university. So we haven't seen that, but at the same time, we've still got a labour market with sort of 3.9% unemployment rate. So beyond full employment, the economy is probably operating at capacity, and that's why the Reserve Bank is trying to moderate demand to take those inflationary pressures out of the economy. And what the federal government should be doing is tightening fiscal policy to take the pressure off interest rates, and they haven't. Broadly, fiscal policy's been neutral in terms of policy changes. So I think you asked me earlier, what would I be doing if I were Jim Chalmers? And pretty obvious that he should have been doing this from day one, is tightening monetary policy, because that just means interest rates could have been a lot lower than they would be.
Talking about Jim Chalmers, do you find it strange that they're trying to hand a lot of power back away from themselves? Whenever politicians are keen to dump power, bringing the law to dump power, it sort of makes you a bit suspicious. Like they remember he wants to take the treasurer's power to overrule the Reserve Bank away. They're talking about that law. I mean, that sort of thing. That's just crazy. When you ever hear of politicians wanting to get rid of power, they just always want more and more.
Well, what you see a lot of the Labor politicians doing is because they don't have a lot of credibility of their own. They'll lean on bureaucrats and use their credibility. So Claire O'Neill's a good example. She sort of realised she didn't have the intellectual firepower or the reputation to implement immigration reform. So she commissioned Martin Parkinson to go out and do an immigration review for her, Martin Parkinson being the former Treasury Secretary. So we see a lot of that with Labor governments, particularly in the Treasury portfolios. Jim Chalmers, I'm sure at some point will be hiding behind Stephen Kennedy, the current Treasury Secretary, whose signature is on your dollar bills. And you're right. I mean, these are things that if they had any sort of statesmanship and capacity for leadership and intellectual ability, they should be making these arguments themselves, but they just don't have the confidence, and they want to leverage the reputations of, and potentially damage the reputations of, some of these senior bureaucrats. So the new head of the Productivity Commission is probably going to be a victim of this. Danielle Wood, career bureaucrat, worked at the Labor-founded Grattan Institute, and it looks like she's flying kites for Jim Chalmers. So she's front-running policy for him.
Thanks, Jason. We'll have to let you go. But thanks for your comments. It's
thanks very much, mate.
Been some really good comments there. So thanks for watching. And if you are having
hopefully it inspires more people to ring in next episode. Sorry, Stephen.
If you are having trouble hearing it on the Facebook, head over to Rumble. Rumble's really good, or YouTube. We're streaming there as well. So.
Yeah, Rumble's really great with content, people that presenting content, but with commenting, I've noticed it can be a bit problematic. I tend to copy my comments before I post them on Rumble because they disappear.
Rumble's hopeless when it comes to that. It's not integrated with StreamYard, so we can't unfortunately get the comments from Rumble, but we do have a look at it afterwards. So, but thank you, Jason. We'll catch you next time.
God bless, mate. Have a good day. See ya.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Now, Burchell, we're getting towards the end because we've taken up your time tonight, and thank you very much for giving us your time. I just want to ask one quick question. What are your views on the GST? Do you think that's a good option? I know when Costello implemented it, he didn't implement it as well as he would have liked due to having to negotiate with the Democrats and other parties. But what is your overall view of the GST?
Well, I suppose my overall view of the GST is it's an efficient tax, but do you really want to give the government a new revenue source? Because it's just going to be a license for larger government. And the one good thing about the GST is it's been very politically difficult to increase it. Imagine if it hadn't been. They've got consumption taxes in the order of 20% in Europe. And as a result, they've got governments as a proportion of the economy are sort of 40 to 50% across Europe. And from the revenue and from the billions of dollars provided by the consumption taxes. So, yeah, look, sure, it's an efficient tax and potentially could replace a whole bunch of other taxes. But you can get rid of those other taxes, the inefficient ones like stamp duty, by cutting government expenditure. And that would be my strong preference. There's no way I'm going to greenlight a government to have a whole bunch of new revenue because it's bad enough they misspend the tax dollars they do have at the moment.
Right now, that's right. We've got to kind of punish Big Brother a little bit. We have to punish them a little bit and we have to take away their iPad or laptop a little bit, right?
Oh, exactly. So it's been pleasing that it's actually the left who oppose any sort of change to the GST, because otherwise they'd just be hiking this thing all the time. So yeah, just from a political economy perspective, the sort of status quo is and sort of sensitivity around the GST is I think that's a great thing.
Okay, and it's now time for our final segment, and it's called Build Your Fantasy Government. Now, Burchell, you're in charge of the next Parliament of Australia. You can choose 5 or 6 current or former politicians. They could be living or deceased. They could be experts in a certain field, maybe an economist that you know. Doesn't have to be a politician, it can be anyone you choose, but you're in charge of the next Parliament of Australia. 5 or 6 people to head it up. Who do you choose?
Oh, I suppose we need a prime minister. So I don't know. How about Andrew Hastie? He's that guy's kill count is probably larger than the entire parliament combined. He's young, attractive. I'm sure he can rise to sort of John F. Kennedy type of persona if he wanted to, and easy on the eye for the female voters, masculine, conservative for the people like myself, and he knows how to use firearms, so you can't go past Hastie as PM. Draft in, have MLA as the treasurer, give him his chainsaw, let him go after the Treasury Department. Probably it's not really a parliamentary role, but definitely turf Danny Wood out of the Productivity Commission, put in someone competent. Maybe Tony Abbott's former chief economist, Andrew Stone, have him in the either the Productivity Commission role or the Treasury Department. Someone sensible like Angus Taylor to head up finance. He's got economics, law, Rhodes Scholar, formidable individual, and good values on a personal level. And resources, we get Matt Canavan back into the resources portfolio and add make it a joint resources and environment portfolio, so you can take care of all the red tape and all the funding we provide to all these left-wing groups to do advocacy against our own interests. So I'm not sure if I left anything out.
That's pretty solid. Like, that's, I think, out of a lot of the guests that we've had on, that's a fairly solid, real-rounded kind of like overview of what's needed. I think out of all the, we always have to rate these I
draft Dick Smith into the immigration portfolio. I think is actually interested in the nation's well-being in a way that most politicians wouldn't be, and they're just all of them are captured by having to service the media and some of the property developer donors. So it just sort of policy area that you want to take completely away from politicians, just so they can't do sort of damage they've done over the last 25 years.
Wow.
So, Burchell, how can people follow you? I know you're quite active on Twitter. You also have a website. What's the best way?
Oh, look, I sort of do a lot of real-time commentary on Twitter, just whatever crosses my path and annoys me on a particular day. There's not much happening on the website at the moment. And I just recycle a lot of interesting commentary in from the States as well, where the sort of ecosystem's a lot deeper and richer. So I think the thing about me is, because most other public policy economists won't touch on the sort of issues I'll touch on, then you can get some deeper insights. I'll also hang shit on a politician if they need it, critique a journalist when I think they're out of line, which is quite often, and speak truth to power, because I've been cancelled once and still trying to figure out if pretty sure they can't cancel me twice, but who knows? Let's see what happens.
And also plug your boot camp as well, because I think if I can scrape up the $250, I'd love to come along as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it too. I have to see what I can do. I have to talk to my accountant.
So we've got student race as well. So I've got some sponsorship money to discount that for students. And this is the most empowering thing you can do in Australian politics. No one trains candidates, and admittedly, it's tailored towards local council races. But everything you learn here you'll be able to scale to state or federal. It's just a question of can you scale your volunteer base, fundraising base to that sort of level. And look, if you get a spot on council, good chance that maybe someday you will. So this is this arms you with the skill set to fight back. And if without that, you're pretty much defenseless.
I've got a lot of tradies and a lot of business people on this who watch this podcast, including myself. Are some of the skill sets that are learned, that, without spoiling anything, can they be transferable to business as well?
Yeah, I suppose particularly the digital marketing. So it's funny. One of the council candidates out in Lithgow, he ran a retail motorbike equipment business. So I sat him down, showed him how to run Facebook ads and geofencing, and so, oh, this is great. I can use this for my retail business. And look, I didn't think it's particularly hard, but he was 10th. He placed 10th out of 9 spots, and he got the countback position. But by that time, he'd moved up to Taree, so didn't want to be a councillor anymore. But he almost got on, and look, I didn't think he spent that much money either, and he learned something and a skill set that was applicable to his business. And some of the defamation stuff you'll learn here definitely keep you in good stead. Probably a better policy never to target people on personal level to begin with, but sometimes you just don't get a choice.
Oh, that sounds good. It sounds interesting too, because I might be able to write that off as a tax deduction. Business training.
Speak to your own accountant about that one. But if you're in the not-for-profit space, or you're working as a staffer, or have some other remunerative role related to these sort of activities, then it's deductible.
All right, I'll talk to some of the guys too. We've got some charities that watch the show as well.
Yeah, students are more than welcome to reach out for the student discount, and it's something no one else has done before. Trained candidates. I'm quite keen to see what sort of results we get in September, but also it's great networking. You meet fantastic people, learn interesting things, and sort of insights that'll give you into politics and policy is second to none. That was definitely my experience in the States, and it's going to be a pleasure to bring this to Sydney and Oberon.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Burchell, and also thank you for all the people in the chat tonight. We've had really good engagement, so thank you everyone that's been watching and contributing, and thank you to Jason for calling in as well and following us there in the background. Burchell, I really love this chat tonight. I really love delving into topics, especially topics that Adam and I might not be well versed in, and we learn from you. So thank you for that, and would love to have you back on in the future. Maybe if there's a big economic policy issue that we can delve into at some point throughout this year, we'd love to have you back on and talk about that.
Yeah, that'd be a pleasure, and I suppose I'll see some of you folks at the rally down in Canberra on the 6th of February.
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yep, you will. All right, thanks everyone for watching. If you can share this out, please do so. I think there's some really good stuff in tonight's interview, so please share it far and wide. Also, check us out on Instagram, where I share the clips of the show. You can follow them on Twitter as well, but Instagram's probably the best place for that. Thank you again, Adam. I'll see you next week, and hopefully we'll see you all again next week as well. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Yeah.